Hello and welcome to episode 59 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. For this episode, we're going back to 1976 and watching All the President's Men, starring Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. Sometimes our reasons for picking a movie are a bit of a stretch, but for this episode, there are almost too many connections to list. For one, Steven Spielberg's latest film, The Post, hits theaters this month, which tells another story about the Washington Post's run-ins with the U.S. government. All the President's Men also feels especially relevant given the current political climate.
And if you need another reason, Dustin Hoffman's inclusion in the growing list of men who have been accused of sexual misconduct made us wonder if it's difficult to watch him or any of the other accused the same way again. Regardless of how the movie plays in the present, All the President's Men was a hit upon its release. It won 4 Oscars in 1977 and was nominated for 4 more, including Best Picture. Over the decades, it has entered the conversation whenever people discuss the best movies of all time. Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman's performances still resonate, and the portrayal of tenacious and thorough reporting has inspired journalism students ever since its release.
But does good reporting make for a good movie?
Or have all the secret meetings with a garage freak lost their luster? Keep listening.
Yes, I'm not looking for a fight.
I'm not looking for a fight either.
I'm just aware of the fact that you've only been here 9 months.
What does that got to do with anything?
Well, I've been in the business since I'm 16.
What are you saying?
Well, I'm trying to tell you that if you'd read mine and then read yours...
May I read yours?
Yeah. I walked by, gave yours a glance. It didn't look right, so I just figured I'd refine it a little. That first paragraph has to have more clarity. The reader's going to understand it. You don't mention Colson's name to the third paragraph. I think mine's better, but you go ahead and read it. If you think yours is better, we'll give yours to the desk. I've got Colson's name up front. He was a White House consultant and nobody knows
right.
it.
Yours is better.
So that's the 2 stars of the movie we're discussing today, All the President's Men. That's Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman playing Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, Washington Post reporters in the 70s. Local reporters at the time.
Yeah, running the Metro beat.
Doing the Metro beat, and that's Carl Bernstein punching up Woodward's writing a bit.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, this is sort of the beginnings of the partnership that will eventually uncover the entire Watergate scandal.
Yeah, and it really kind of sets the scene for what their dynamics are, because Bernstein kind of does that without permission, and Woodward is
a little more level-headed, it seems, and
he's,
a little more maybe by the book.
Yeah, he's fine with being corrected and helped, but just ask me first, you know?
Yeah,
do me that courtesy.
A please would have been nice. A thank you. Manners is really what he's looking for. It's just good manners.
Yeah, and this is a movie about manners.
Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome back, Ryan. You know, I think actually we didn't really take a break as far as episodes being released, but it felt like a break because we haven't actually recorded
earlier in December, and yeah.
So it's
good to be back.
Good to be back. I don't know what you did in your little vacation time off of this podcast. I know I tore through a ton of movies. I don't know if you
I
did.
ended up watching a lot too.
Yeah, so I feel like it feels good to talk about movies again because I feel like I've just been watching them like crazy.
I saw a good handful over break.
Newer ones, older ones, combination?
Newer, things that came out last year.
Yeah.
I kind of realized I don't really go back and watch old movies aside from for this, which kind of bummed me out.
I kind of made that actually a little bit of a New Year's resolution to go back a little bit more.
I should, because at this point, if it doesn't come out in the future, I've kind of resigned to not seeing it. Like, of the old movies I haven't seen, it's almost like I will never see them if I don't change something. But yeah, I saw some really great movies, some challenging movies.
Anything that, and this is a little off topic, anything that really...
Mother.
I watched that last night.
I would love to talk about it sometime. What really made the movie make sense for me was reading Alyssa Wilkinson's writing from Vox.
Yeah.
She really I feel
Great
like
writer.
She just nailed
Yeah.
it. Like got that movie.
Yeah, she was one of those that was really championing it. And I really like the movie actually.
I really
lot.
liked
In
it
fact,
too.
if you go to my Letterboxd, which we'll talk about Letterboxd in a second, at the moment it is my number one movie of 2017.
Wow.
But there's some big ones I haven't
that.
seen.
I can see that. Yeah.
but-
I really enjoyed it too. I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah, I saw another kind of smaller one called Columbus that I really liked. Did you hear about that one?
No.
He's a Korean American director. He goes by a name Koganada, I think is how it goes by. But Columbus is Columbus, Indiana. And it's a whole little, kind of like a Linklater style, like boy girl musing type of thing. John Cho from Harold and Kumar fame is one of the leads in it, and it's a really beautiful film. Like the camera barely moves at all, and the architecture is sort of a character in the movie. But
now that I'm looking it up, I do remember that I've heard of that, but I hadn't heard anything other than seeing like a trailer for it. Or
yeah, I highly recommend it. I think it's pretty good.
Good.
But yeah, anyways, let's get back to
All the President's
Men.
Men.
President's Men. We'll do our normal thing here. Talking about maybe first time watching it. Do you have a story?
The first time I watched it is also the last time I watched it. It was in college, and it was for a journalism class. I think it's pretty commonly shown in journalism classes for good reason.
You mean the manners?
The manners of it, yeah. Just a real lesson in politeness. And it's kind of funny because I teach a film class now, so I'm showing movies in class and hoping kids are really watching them and getting something out of it. But I feel like my recollection of watching movies in class was that, like, if it was for a class, I didn't really like invest in the movie much.
Yeah. It also usually got split up too, in chunks. Yeah.
Yeah. But with All the President's Men, I will admit I watched it a little bit like that sort of, okay, this is for learning. But I also was pretty engrossed in it. And so as far as watching movies in class exercise went, it was one of the ones that I remember liking a lot. But because we were kind of framing it through that, like, now watch how they fact check, watch how they approach interviews. It was nice to watch it this time, just kind of enjoying it as a movie, and kind of a classic movie now. The rating I would have given with the, in-class viewing would probably have been about 4 stars.
Sure.
But with the kind of caveat that I feel like I didn't really watch it for what it was necessarily.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know what you mean, because that's actually the first time I watched it was for a journalism class too, and mine happened to be a high school journalism class, so I was even less invested, I think, than I would have been in college. We had a really great journalism teacher in high school, though. But I think when you're watching a movie for class, especially if it's not a film class, you're kind of questioning whether you should even care about the movie, because you know why they chose it. They chose it for the content of what it's showing you. So sometimes in history class, you might watch like a historical movie, but it might not have actually been the best movie. It's just a movie that shows what they need to teach.
Yeah.
So I did like All the President's Men, but I don't think I was like you. I just kind of watched it as a class movie and didn't really think I needed to pay that much attention to it as a movie.
Right.
But I liked it enough. It was fine. And then I actually watched it again during that period that we often talk about, that post-college period of just trying to tear through movies that you feel like are blind spots. And All the President's Men, I felt like I remembered so little of it. I wanted to watch it again. And it was also, I was at the time watching a lot of 70s cinema. So it's kind of brought up a lot in that conversation as well, 70s American cinema. And I loved it that time. So if you look on my Letterboxd rating, it's been a 5-star movie for me.
Yeah.
That had probably been still over 10 years ago. So I was excited to watch it again. For another time, and just see, especially as we talked about in our introduction, where we're at right now with the political climate, and especially even the Washington Post itself, and the kind of reporting it's doing now of, the Trump administration. And I was excited to dig in and just see, like, okay, so does this movie still speak to us, or does it almost seem like naive or like
it would have been nice to go back to that time or
something. or even like, was it pie in the sky about journalism in the way that we can no longer be, that kind of stuff. And I think those are still great questions to talk about with this movie, but those were kind of what I had in mind as I was watching it this time.
Yeah, definitely. And I've also read a lot more about the Nixon era.
You read like Nixon Land, right?
Yeah.
A while ago. And
yeah. So
and Frost Nixon, of course.
Oh gosh. I mean, that's always there. It's just one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So how was this movie going to compare?
Just
since
an
Frost
evergreen.
Nixon had come out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like I know a lot more about Watergate, and I definitely was able to watch this movie without needing to like, oh, wait. So who's this Haldeman? Like, I kind of have that knowledge, just the baseline understanding that I feel like audiences at the time would have been,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this was definitely coming out. I think it was even being produced as Watergate was still like the stories had obviously come out, but what I was reading was that Redford was already trying to get the movie rights before the book was even written.
Yeah, while they were writing the book.
Yeah. So this was definitely fresh in everyone's minds at the time who was watching this.
Yeah. So it was nice to watch it having at least some knowledge that, I mean, when I watched it in college, I knew about Watergate, but I was pretty lost with the names, and
I think the most I knew was
piece anything together.
Yeah, some kind of. I think the most I knew of Watergate when I watched it was the burglary Watergate scene in Forrest Gump.
Oh, right.
Where Forrest Gump is the one who calls
that's right.
saying that the power's gone out or something because there's guys in flashlights down there. And then just the famous, Nixon resignation speech and what happened in between those two things was a complete mystery to me.
Yeah. So my Letterboxd is 4. And I think that I would absolutely 4.5 and possibly even 5.
Yeah.
For the rewatch. Because it's just, I mean, it slots in so well with, Network and some of the other movies that you and I have found speak to us and kind of are the ones that have stuck with us. Then the connections, just like you said, to the current political climate and as things are being uncovered and, unnamed sources. And a lot of people are talking down unnamed sources like it's an unprecedented and always suspicious practice.
Yeah.
This is a story that shows that sometimes unnamed sources are the only way to be able to progress in your investigation, but also keep people abreast of what is being uncovered.
Yeah. I mean, I am really excited to dig into this a little bit deeper with you because I feel like there were a lot of lines in this movie that a few times I watched it, I probably wouldn't have counted as like some of the more meaningful lines to me.
Right.
Or I would have read them completely different before where we're at right now with the Trump administration. We'll get into specifics, I'm sure, in a bit. But yeah, there's so much to talk about, almost too much to talk about.
Yeah.
To the point where I was thinking about canceling tonight because I don't know if we can do this podcast. There's just so much that we're never going to get through it all. So
wow. Yeah. I mean, we'll do our best. We'll see where we go with it.
I would go. For me, watching it this time, I was at a 5-star. I'm very happy to keep it at 5 stars, actually. Although I am on the verge of knocking it back for very personal reasons that have nothing to do with the movie, or it's more actually with what actually happened historically that just ruffle me such the wrong way. And it's such a crucial part of this movie that it's almost enough to make me want to knock it against it, but I can't because that's what happened. And so, do you want me to?
Yeah, I guess you should say that, unless it's like you definitely know when it's going to come up.
It's going to seem so nitpicky to anyone else, but I'm a librarian, and it bugs me beyond belief that the Library of Congress just gave them those patron records. Like they asked the main librarian, and he actually says, and they do frame it as if it's some kind of like not sinister, but sort of like influenced person where he says White House records are confidential. And I'm like, of course they're confidential. Patron records are confidential. They should always be confidential. You should never get patron records. That's such a bedrock of the American Library Association since like the 1920s, is that you keep, now it's never been something that's been demanded to be officially put in writing at every single library institution. And it is what happened historically. You know, they did go to someone at the Library of Congress and asked for the records, and they said no. And so they went to a more of a clerk level position and said, can we have the records? And they just gave them like thousands and thousands of records. And it just bugs me so much. And now, actually, I think in 1976, actually, the Library of Congress did say we will no longer, and under any circumstances, release. It's important records. Not to. It's the whole point that like you don't want someone to not check out something that they need information for because of what could come back to them, you know. But it is also how it's kind of framed in the movie as this was an obstacle to get over, and at no point in the movie does it raise the moral question of that. It's almost seen as like they got what they needed. That's great. This is wonderful.
Yeah,
you know? And it is really the needle in the haystack that gives them everything that it comes sort of out of that. You know, it's that definitely. It's the record of them checking out the book, the Bridge of Chappaquiddick.
That showed that they were kind of on the right track. That they were following a trail that was going to lead them someplace.
So it's the one area of the movie where I'm torn. I'm torn
as a librarian.
Because they also do this like really actually pretty impressive and beautiful shot of the Library of Congress where it does really show visually. It shows that sort of like meticulous, just getting down in there and just spending the time doing the work that no one else wants to do to find the information you need.
Just looking at thousands of slips of paper,
just doesn't make librarians look too good.
They do say something like they need to find somebody who's
a more sympathetic voice or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's, I guess that clerk character isn't given much backstory.
Perhaps just seeing him get a slap on the wrist would have been nice. Okay. You know.
All right. Well, so that's a half star.
It would,
even though history is not contradicting that.
I'm not going to bring it down. I can't do that. But it's definitely something that like I noticed, and it bugged me enough to like pause the movie.
Oh gosh.
To see like what actually happened, because I was like, if they made that up. Like that's so irresponsible to like make librarians look like they should ever do that. You know?
From what I read, the filmmakers checked every fact that they presented in the movie. I think there's one made up scene, which is the way that Bernstein like sneaks into the office in Miami.
Oh, okay.
That he didn't get in that way. I don't know if there was not a problem getting in or whatever, but everything else they kept checking, even like before they filmed it, because they wanted it to hold water.
They actually worked in such close relation to the Post and to Woodward and Bernstein in the whole process of making the movie, and that the Post was not terribly thrilled about the movie being made about them. There's an oral history you can read in the Washington Examiner, and they talk a lot about that, how Bradley was pretty uncomfortable with it, and Bernstein and Woodward were like, okay, I just don't want things to get too Hollywood. And they were very like, and they had to make sure that Redford wanted to make a movie about kind of the mundane facts of journalism, you know. And they started filming in the Post's offices, but then they realized it's just not going to work out. You can't really have a newspaper come out and shoot a movie in the same space. So,
and I also read that the reporters, as they were working, were like acting,
and like trying to
get noticed,
look cool,
So, all right. So, I'm sorry that bothered you.
Well, it just made me stop. And once I realized that, unfortunately, that is actually what happened, then I was okay with it being in the movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would have been really, really mad to the point of like really downgrading this movie if that was one of those Hollywood things that was made up. But it wasn't. So I can't knock it, you know.
Good. Well, we've gotten my librarian bugaboo out.
Yeah, it's out of the way. All right. Sorry, every listener.
What do you connect to in this movie? What resonates with you?
I'll take out the stuff that's super relevant to now, and just talk generally about what I love about the movie. I've always just enjoyed movies that are done well about journalism, because I feel like it's just one of those professions that I've respected. I've always respected journalists when they're doing the actual job of journalism.
Right.
And I think this is a movie that shows what that is. But you can go down the list, technically speaking, of this movie, and it is like a masterclass. You can talk about the acting is great. You know, every character is so well cast. Yeah. Every single character is amazingly cast in this movie.
Look at the cast.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah. I mean, we're not just talking about Hoffman and Redford here. I mean, you've got
Jason
Robards, Holbrook, you've got
Jack Warden.
Yeah, Jack Warden.
He's one of those guys that you, like, if you don't recognize his name, you've definitely seen him if you've watched 70s cinema at all. And Ned Beatty shows up, which I was like, I forgot about, and I was excited to see him again.
The guy who plays Segretti, Robert Walden is his name. I thought that was a great character. Jane Alexander, who plays the bookkeeper that meets with Bernstein twice, I believe.
Right.
She's great because they get these great performances that are really convincing, actually, of how people actually give up information, you know, and their insecurity in doing that. So that's, the performances. You've got, I mean, do I need to just go down the credits? I mean, it's a who's who of 70s movies, really. I mean, you know, you've got a script by William Goldman, who, you know, wrote like Princess Bride. You've got your DP is Gordon Willis, who did The Godfather.
Right.
And they're all, I think, working at the top of their game in this movie. I mean, the contrast between that like stale white light of the newsroom and then the dark that he pulls off in the garages with Deep Throat are just so great. And the sound design, I don't know who did the sound design, but the sounds of those typewriters and just the way that they just take you into that journalistic world so effectively and make something thrilling out of really the nuts and bolts of putting together a story. You know?
Yeah. It's a story that should be exciting, but a movie that shouldn't be. Really.
Well, why would you make a movie about Watergate and never actually show any of the people who are involved in Watergate or any performances of them other than just seeing them through actual television footage?
Right, or hearing them on the telephone, like certain people on the telephone. And and telephone conversations that are just gripping. The performances of the telephone conversations, too. I don't know what kind of movie you would say they were making when they were trying to make this, but there are moments where a phone conversation almost takes on like a horror movie, like Body Snatchers sort of thing.
Yeah,
especially
something's happening.
Yeah, like that first call to the librarian.
And I was just wondering if you can remember any books that Howard Hunt checked out on Senator Kennedy.
Howard Hunt?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I think I do remember. He took out a whole lot of material. Why don't you hold on and I'll see?
I sure will. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bernstein?
Yes, ma'am.
I was wrong.
I beg your pardon?
The truth is I don't have a card that says Mr. Hunt took any material. I don't remember getting the material for... I do remember getting the material for somebody, but it wasn't for Mr. Hunt.
Right.
The truth is I didn't have any requests at all for Mr. Hunt.
Oh.
The truth is I don't know any Mr. Hunt.
The way that they ended up portraying the sort of intangible thing that Woodward and Bernstein had an ear for, you know, like this instinct that the words that the person is saying, that if you read a transcript of the phone call, you wouldn't think there was anything there.
Sure,
but their feel for people just comes through so clearly. And like the notes he's taking during those phone calls are just like gripping.
Yes.
Like when
and
he just
taking
writes,
notes is gripping, period.
Yeah.
Like I love watching them scrawling. In fact,
oh my gosh.
I often take notes on my computer and I was like, I'm taking notes in my notepad
I
today.
noticed you have your book out. I always take handwritten notes when I watch the movies, but
I found that like it was great just to write down stuff again. And I was like, there's something really cool in the movie about them just jotting down notes. And like he's got his notes on the napkins he's pulling out when He comes back from his conversation with the bookkeeper.
Yeah. Without really walking us through how they take notes, you get a very quick sense of how they take notes. And then there are scenes later where they're on the phone with someone, and it's a scene with Bernstein where he's talking to John Mitchell. He's talking to the Attorney General. And Bernstein is just writing furiously and still sort of asking questions and still talking, but then you kind of realize, oh, he's just trying to it's almost like the scene where the cops are trying to trace a call and they're like, keep him on the line. Yeah. Like he's just keeping him on the line until he can get every word written down verbatim. And then once he hangs up, he just drops the phone and like he was never even really in the conversation.
But on March 1, Mitchell personally approved withdrawals from the fund.
All that crap. You putting it in the paper?
Well,
look, it's all been denied. You tell your publisher. Tell Katie Graves she's going to get a tit caught in a big ringer if that's published. Good Christ, that's the most sickening thing I ever heard.
Sir, I just wonder if I could ask you some questions.
What time is it?
It's 11:30, sir.
11:30? Is it morning or night?
It's 11:30 at night, sir. Oh. Sir, the committee to re-elect has issued a statement to our story, but there are just a couple questions.
Did the committee tell you to go ahead and publish the story? You fellas got a great ball game going. Like, as soon as you're done, we're going to do a story on all of you.
Sir, there's just a couple of questions.
Now call my law office in the morning.
Sometimes getting the cold shoulder and getting yelled at is like the best thing that could happen to them. You know, basically he just starts threatening the Post, and it's kind of like, this is awesome.
Yeah,
you know?
if this was, and you really get a sense for how that works and how they have a really good knack for it, and that they're thinking like 3 levels beyond the conversation. I just don't know how they even thought to like capture those moments that way. I mean, almost everything is shot in that dual focus, Redford or Bernstein or whoever's in focus, but the background is also in focus. And there's kind of that line in the middle where you can see that the lenses are kind of meeting.
Yeah, that's Willis's use of, I was reading that it's called the split diopter.
Right.
It's a camera that lets you get the full focus in the background and foreground. And that's used a ton in this movie.
Yeah. Because there are lenses you can use where it would all be in focus, but you wouldn't be able to get the close focus. And there's times where like you just see Woodward at his phone and he's been at his phone and there's kind of jump cuts and the background just keeps changing. You see how much stuff has gone on throughout the day at the Post, and Woodward's just been at his phone. Like he's been sitting there this whole time. So partly it shows like the dedication of Woodward and the single focus he had while everything else was going on. But also, this is just a paper that was one story among many. And they had to fight to get it on the front page.
And I love the details. I noticed this time at one point, this was early on in the movie. It's one of the first phone conversations that Woodward has. It's just this little detail that I was almost like, that looks like a mistake. I wonder if it'll have continuity in the next shot. But one of his sleeves is slightly rolled up while he's on the phone. Like, these are reporters that they don't care how they look.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that was a detail put in there by a wardrobe person just to show that this is not like a Hollywood type movie. You know, like they're not even going to worry about if your shirt is on correctly. His sleeve is like awkwardly rolled up, like, and I was like, fix that.
Right.
But no, he's so focused in that moment.
Yeah.
You know, in what he's doing and what he's trying to get out of that phone call.
Yeah, and I remember what you're talking about. It was kind of folded past his watch a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you talked about sound design. That scene in the Library of Congress where it starts off on like a very tight close-up of their hands flipping through the cards, and the sound is just
the cards they never should have had, by the way. Right. But yes,
the cards that they did have, and
I know what you mean.
The sound is exaggerated of them just flipping through the cards, and as the camera pulls back and pulls back and pulls back, all you hear is the sound of the cards. And maybe the music has come in.
Yeah. You don't get you get the distance of the aerial shot, but you never get the distance of what's actually happening with their hands.
And that's something that happens a lot with the sound, is that it almost seems simplistic, but they just isolate the important sound and crank it up. But then there are other times where the background of the newsroom is constant and not quite rivaling the conversation, but it's just like this like churning sort of machinery that's working.
Yeah. You know, let's talk a little bit more about the sound. We actually had that voicemail from our listener, Matt. He talked about the sound being something that he really noticed a lot in this movie. It's one of his favorites. So let's just play that voicemail and see what he talks about.
Hey guys, this is your pretty faithful listener, Matt calling. Just heard that you guys were doing this movie, and it's one of my favorites. I'm curious to see if you think it still holds up. Just wanted to talk about a few things. I mean, obviously, the acting in the movie blows my mind every single time I watch it. The one thing I really want to talk about, I think the first time I saw the movie, if I'm not mistaken, it was senior year. I did a semester of film school, and I was kind of, I think for the first time, impressed upon just how much sound is important. And, you know, right from the get-go, you've got the punch of the typewriter, but the atmosphere of that movie and, like, the silence paired with certain sound effects, which maybe are a little bit heavily done, like Robert Redford's shoes when he's running away from, I guess as it turns out, nobody that one night. To me, it just really helped build the suspense. I also love the voices in that movie and the array of voices you have from, like, I mean, obviously you could listen to Jason Robards talk all day long with his gravelly voice, but Hal Holbrook's kind of raspy voice, Redford's got a great deep voice, and then you've got, you know, Hoffman's, you know, it's a little bit, nasally or something like that, and then, the Segretti character, his voice is almost kind of whiny. Seventh Heaven guy has that kind of deep voice, but it's kind of softer too. So I don't know, there's something about the sound of that movie that I think always draws me in. Anyway, glad you guys are doing it. Curious to hear your thoughts. Now I'm kind of thinking maybe I should go see it again.
So some good examples there. I noticed the footsteps too. Robert Redford's pretty paranoid in that moment.
Yeah.
And how they just sound so loud and kind of empty.
Yeah.
Like nothing else around them, you know?
It just heightens his isolation and how he doesn't know who's involved. He doesn't know whose toes he's stepping on.
I loved, I mean, talk about endings that just leave you stunned. I mean, I feel like the sound is what's writing the story at the end of that. The 21 gun salute as Nixon's being sworn into the office, and you're hearing the gunshots, and they're loud as hell with this typewriter sound that's typing out all the different headlines of the stuff that would eventually be his downfall.
Right.
And they're overlapping with each other, and they're getting louder and louder and louder and louder, and then it's just silence, and the credits roll. I love that.
Yeah.
It just leaves you so stunned, and the message in that couldn't be more clear. But it doesn't feel like it's hitting you over the head, even though it sort of is.
Yeah,
it's pummeling you with bullets almost. But like the power of the press to bring down the powerful who misuse their power. You know?
Yeah, you've kind of got the both sides taking shots. Like you open the movie with the typewriter sounding like gunfire.
And it was
gunfire.
It was a mix, actually, of gunfire and like 4 or 5 typewriters and the crack of a whip.
Yeah. And so you open with that, just the typewriter kind of firing the first shots. And then in the end, you've got the 21-gun salute from the TV almost firing back as the typewriter just keeps this machine gun of rounds fired off. And then the silence is almost like, and we know who won.
Yeah, the typewriter gets the last word. Yeah.
But I also, and I think this was something that Matt Singer wrote about, but the use of television in this movie is pretty subtle, but if you think about what's being shown on TV versus the reporting they're doing, this movie is a very strong treatise on television news because all the news reports that they show and kind of, you know, by extension, what television news reported on wasn't what Woodward and Bernstein were reporting. They weren't following the story.
Right.
The TV reported the White House's response. And so it was this idea that TV will be the mouthpiece of the administration, and that what you hear from TV is only going to be this filtered, sanitized, commodified, very controlled response to the facts, rather than the facts themselves.
Yes, and that was something I actually really noticed this time and felt like that's something that spoke to me a lot more because of our current political climate. And also, I'm not necessarily equating this with Woodward and Bernstein level journalism. I'm not. But I think you're seeing that play out a little bit in even something like the release of Fire and Fury. And there's an article in Film and History back from 2006 by Jonathan Kirshner where he was just talking about All the President's Men. I guess it had gotten a DVD release that year or something like that. And he kind of talks about this idea of dangerous journalism. And In the article, Jonathan Kirshner writes, quote, dangerous in part because high-powered journalists become enmeshed in the Washington establishment, their reputations and stories dependent on privileged access to power brokers. Woodward and Bernstein, the ultimate outsiders with nothing, quote, remember they were hungry,
Right.
Had nothing to lose.
Right.
I heard these kind of things being said about Michael Wolff and how his journalistic credibility is sketchy at best, but that he's doing something we wish more journalists would do, which is actually to put their own reputations on the line.
Right.
Which is actually to say, I don't care if I lose all my access to the White House power. These stories need to be told the way that they need to be told. The truth needs to be told as dirty as it is, and even if it pisses them off to the point where I never get access to the White House again.
Yeah.
And I thought about that as I was watching this, that part of the reason that this story broke at all is because the people who broke it were journalists who had nothing to lose. They weren't losing their access to the White House. And it really made me wonder what White House reporting at all even means.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to be a White House reporter? It seems like it even back then, it was nothing more than just spitballing what the White House wanted you to say.
Yeah.
And if you were afraid to really challenge that because you'd lose your access, you know.
Well, and not only that because they didn't have the typical avenues of access, they had to find other avenues, and people who weren't used to talking or used to, like, if people are asking me that, nobody's ever asked me this question before, you know, that he went to secretaries and people who were in on the information, but weren't the people who were going to be named, you know, and
a White House reporter would probably never think to speak to them. Why would they need to? They've got the press secretary right there.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I can go into the press briefing. I'm not going to talk to the person who, you know. So this is maybe going off topic a little bit, but maybe onto a different topic. And if we need to come back to it, that's fine. But I also, again, watching this movie post 2017, I couldn't help but notice how vital to the uncovering of this story women were. And women with consciences, even though they were being threatened, also knew that what they had witnessed and were a part of wasn't right. And you see a lot more men in this movie looking to cover their bases and protect their power and maintain their
interests.
Power.
Yeah.
And granted, because the men did have power, it's just a fact of the 70s and probably a fact of today that the people in power were the men and the women were people in the room, but not people who were taken seriously. And you see this with several of the characters, the women who speak to Woodward and Bernstein. The only reason they don't speak is because they're afraid for their safety, not because they think they've got some power to protect or an agenda to push. And ultimately, they can't live with the conscience, basically. And I thought it was really amazing in this movie how women and their strength were the main reason they got a lot of the information they did.
You know, one of the big scenes you're talking about where a woman is actually giving up a lot of information is the bookkeeper, played by, I think we said, Jane Alexander.
AO, the general accounting report said that there was $350,000 in the safe of the committee to re-elect the president. Were you aware there was that kind of funds from the very beginning?
A lot of people are watching me. They know I know a lot.
Was it all $100 bills?
A lot of it was. I thought it was an all-purpose political fund. You know, for taking fat cats to dinner, things like that.
$350,000 for dinners? How was it paid out?
Not in one big chunk. There was a list of 15 names and the amount of money given to each person next to the name.
What happened to the list?
It was destroyed. It was the only record.
There's a lot of different ways to read a certain shot that I saw, which is when he's sitting in the living room and she's still in the, I guess maybe it's the kitchen or something. And they're far apart, and between them is the staircase railing, and it looks like bars between them, like they're both, or maybe like she's trapped or something. And then as the night goes on, like she kind of crosses that bar. It's almost like she's freeing herself, like she's freeing herself from the bars that are around her. Or even that could just be there's an information separation there, and that the two of them are far apart. And so it was a really unique visual way to talk about what's happening psychologically with these characters. And so many of these women do seem like they need to get this off their chest, or they need to do something about it. But I also sense, I think the movie doesn't even shy away from the fact that in a way Woodward and Bernstein are exploiting that as well. Like they're kind of using their charm and their demeanor to sort of get them to open up in a way that they really don't want to at first. They do and they don't.
Well, I feel like Bernstein is definitely painted as somebody who tries to use charm, tries to use things.
Well, there's the one that's the first
Early
woman
on,
he talks to, who says, what did she say? I've been warned about you.
Yeah, my
or
friend
something.
warned me about you. Yeah.
A little hard to watch now with Hoffman. We can get into that a little bit later. But
I feel like Woodward was less charming and more, he tried to be
empathetic or
and honest and appeal to a sense of justice more than anything.
Maybe honest. There's the one scene that I didn't know how to read where Sloane says how he's been a Republican his whole life, and he says, me too. And then Bernstein looks at him like,
that's
which is funny.
That's a white enough lie, but there's that part. I thought it was such it was one of my favorite moments on this rewatch when Woodward is talking to Sloane's wife at the door. And she's trying to protect him and be, like protect her husband from whatever could come if he talks, and also just protect her from people that she doesn't know. And Woodward says, it's really for his benefit. And she says, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And Woodward just says, no, it's not.
That's honest. Yeah.
And she was like calling him like, no, you want your story. But when he said, no, it's not, it was also sort of like, this needs do the right thing. That bigger sense of justice.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like most of the women in this movie are depicted as having that underlying sense of justice. That none of them are telling their information for any reason other than the right thing needs to happen. And that felt really powerful, especially when you watch so many other 70s movies, and even the beginning of this movie, where women are just charmed into things,
Well, we haven't even let's compare that actually to who we haven't even talked about yet, and that's Deep Throat, Hal Holbrook. I think that what's interesting in this movie is you don't get a sense of what his motivations are.
Right.
I don't think. I mean, he wants them to uncover the right thing,
especially
which I think later on we would find out was probably pretty accurate. Now we know.
The deputy director of the FBI.
Mark Felt, I think was his name. But he was kind of a number 2 of the FBI at the time, who felt he was just embittered. Like he just felt like he was slighted. And so what did you think now how those Deep Throat scenes sort of worked in the movie compared to these other ones where people are giving up information in broad daylight? And
it's interesting because he had more information than anybody.
Right. But he was
stringing him along,
less willing to give it up,
right?
And also like almost treating it like a game,
And that's what as you're watching the movie, it's really intriguing, and you're like, oh gosh, wait, so and you're starting to piece it together, and then you get to that point pretty much at the same time as Woodward does, where he's like,
well, he calls it a chicken shit game.
He's like, don't give me a hint. Because he says like, oh, you have to figure that out on your own. He's like, just tell me, stop doing this. And it's kind of that moment where Hal Holbrook has his moment of, why am I doing this? And there's part of he gives his reason for giving it out in small pieces when they jump too far. He says he feels like they jumped too far on Haldeman. They went from like nobody to Haldeman, and it was easy to discredit that. But once that was out and it was moving so quickly, he kind of had that moment of, what am I here for? Very implied, like it's not overwrought where he has any sort of like. I do feel like if you kind of look at it, the more heroic of the informants are the women who, in broad daylight, who at their homes, gave this information.
I think that's at this point kind of a stock character almost, like the person who you find that has all the information and kind of lays it all out. And like we talked about, Donald Sutherland's character in JFK, just these sort of government informants who lay it all out, And I kind of liked how, for the movie's sake, it works that he keeps things from them. You know what I mean? Like, because you're building this mystery.
Right.
And if he just kind of laid it all out like Sutherland does in JFK is doing a very different thing.
Yeah.
You know, JFK is almost like laying an argument out for the viewer.
Right.
Whereas this is like, we know what happens. It's almost like, it's interesting to me that we know how the pieces fit together. It's really a feat to me that they're able to build so much suspense and so much curiosity in something that you could easily look up on your own, or like something that like most people at the time did know.
Yeah.
So you're really only curious about this in how it unfolds. And so I think that the way that they piece, like just even the pacing of the movie, the way Deep Throat is sort of injected in time to time, almost just he doesn't do anything other than say you're on the right track, but that he's also just this sort of shadowy, mysterious character. He always just shows up. You never actually, he's there already all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And you never see him leave, and you know, like,
almost like a spirit, like, like
just sort
you've
of
seen it in other movies where they like have a dream. And
it's like ghostly type
somebody,
figure almost, you know, and he's always shot like sort of, you can only see like half his face at a time, and it's dark, and that's a way that they can just, in these little, you know, incremental ways, ratchet up the tension a little bit, but not in a way that's Hollywood, in a way that's fake or, you know, untrue to what actually happened. Now, there's two things in this movie that I would not have even thought about too hard before our current administration, but hit me like square in the chest as I was watching it now. And the one is actually the one woman who doesn't give anything up, and what she says, which is like, do you understand loyalty? Have you ever even heard of the word loyalty? And I mean, we heard that that's what Trump wanted from Comey. You know, I demand loyalty, you know, and how that just to me was like, oh, it's all there. Even then, you had the people who were in the administration who were just, they knew exactly what was going on, but it was party politics and they didn't care, you know? There were always people who put party before country and had no problem doing that.
Well, I mean, everybody involved did that.
Well,
you know, everybody that they were naming. Yeah. But another line that felt more or less relevant to today is when Deep Throat's talking to Woodward. I think that's what's going on, and Woodward is sort of incredulous, like that can't be how they would have done that because it's just so obvious or so. And Deep Throat says, "These are not these are not very bright guys."
Yes, I remember that. It's like, yep.
They did that stupid thing, and they did it that stupidly.
Yeah, exactly. So there was that, and then the other one that I noticed was how they just flat out say nobody gives a shit.
You know the results of the latest Gallup poll? Half the country never even heard of the word Watergate. Nobody gives a shit. You guys are probably pretty tired, right? Well, you should be. Go on home. Get a nice hot bath. Rest up 15 minutes. Then get your asses back in gear. We're under a lot of pressure, you know, and you put us there. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country. Not that any of that matters. But if you guys fuck up again, I'm going to get mad.
And how many times do we hear conservatives and Republicans saying the American people do not care about Russia?
Right.
Only the press cares about Russia. And as I was watching this, I was like, thank God. Thank God that the press care about Russia, because we know something's there. Come on. But like now, who would question whether Watergate was an important story?
Right.
But I just thought it was so fascinating to watch in that movie how even the Post itself is telling them, challenging Woodward and Bernstein, saying no one cares about this story. You know?
Yeah. And like, this is front page stuff. Like, we'll put it on page 8 or something. And if you didn't know anything about it, you would think Woodward and Bernstein got this story, were assigned this story because they were Woodward and Bernstein.
Right.
You know, but that people were like, no, I don't want this. Like, nobody wants this. Even the editing desks, they're like, no, this is Metro. It was a break-in at the hotel. It has nothing to do with, As far as things that maybe wouldn't have resonated without watching it in this context, there were a couple things that felt very surreal. Things where people are trying to manage the truth, the way that the Nixon administration responds with just outrage, like, I can't believe anybody would say this about me.
Yeah.
And then the phrase that they use, which should come back, is non-denial denial. When whenever they hear anybody saying that they'll read the response, or like, did you get a statement? And it's, these accusations are atrocious. I can't believe anybody would say such a thing about me. And they would just say non-denial denial. And then they would say, like, we're on the right track. That was what they needed, because their gut told them, like, okay, you could have said a lot of different ways that this isn't true if it weren't true.
Right.
But you did not say
all they
any
said
of
was
that.
they were mad that you were even talking about it.
Right. Yeah. And so that was a little spooky, I guess, or whatever, however it feels to be watching this. I want to talk a little bit more about filmmaking, how visually we are given a lot of stuff, because just the kind of not only using light and shadows where scenes are very brightly lit, or scenes are very people are walking in and out of shadows, but just visually that idea of things being obscured and things not being completely out in the open. And you do have the pillars in the newsroom at the Washington Post, but generally there are no walls in that room, that giant room. And so just these visual things where, like, times where the truth is being made known, and places where the truth is actually allowed to flourish, and times where things are barriers, and just like the idea of, like, lack of transparency and lack of clarity, trying to obscure the truth. Yeah. Just visually kind of comes through a lot in different places. And also the thought process of Woodward and Bernstein, that they would focus on a name. They would focus on one thing, right, and just dig into that. What is this person's name? What is the connection? $25,000, just like these details. But then also scenes where they would be talking, okay, well, what could this mean? If this person's connected, how is, Miami connected to Minnesota? And like, just the way they would also take things in on a macro level, and how often you have the camera starting on something very tight and then backing out. Like, there's the scene where they get into the car,
the aerial shot,
drive away, and then it backs out to the complete. You see the entire city. Yeah. So visually, just the zooming in and the zooming out, and the scene where he's on the phone with Dahlberg, and then he gets on the phone with McCarthy or somebody else, and the camera starts very wide, and then just slowly over the 6 minutes of that shot, just
gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Yeah.
Just like the way that they subtly visually represent the thought process and the reporting process is fantastic.
I agree. I was thinking about those aerial shots and what purpose they serve, and it usually is there's so many tight shots, and then, like, you get a tight shot and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so to me, it says kind of two things, one of which is the truth is out there. It's out there somewhere. And it's even the Library of Congress shot we talked about. But it's also saying this thing is getting bigger and bigger, that this is something that went straight to the White House and involved all the intelligence agencies and was so much bigger than just a burglary.
I think one of the things that carries this movie, though, really is the technical aspects we talked about, and we probably missed some of the technical aspects, but just the relationship between Woodward and Bernstein, and the way that plays out between Redford and Hoffman, and how realistic it feels and not forced at all. And it develops very naturally. Yeah. They don't, like, immediately hit it off. It's not immediately perfect, and it doesn't even click for very long.
Right.
But when it does click, it's so natural, and still they're distinct people.
P is Porter, L is Liddy, that leaves, all that leaves is M. M could be McCord, that's out. It could be Mardian. It could be Magruder. I think it's Magruder. I think it's Magruder, too. Why do you think it's Magruder? Because he was second in command under Mitchell. Why do you think it's Magruder? I think it's Magruder because at one time he was a temporary head of the committee to re-elect before Mitchell. I don't want a cookie. We've got to get that bookkeeper to say it was Magruder. Never get her to say anything but M. We've got to go back there and try to get her to say it.
I don't know. There was just something about their relationship that felt really, really natural and really fun to watch, and really fun to be a part of.
And I like that they didn't have to be buddies, though.
Right. There wasn't
there wasn't even an arc to that. There wasn't an arc to, like, and at the end they were best friends for life. You don't even know. In fact, they might go on not even really caring for each other that much,
Yeah. And they don't get involved with each other's lives at all. It's just, it's a totally professional relationship, but they like, yeah, it's just really great. Yeah.
There's never a sense of like that they're doubting each other,
right?
You know,
no, yeah, there was a lot of trust there, and I guess that's the part of the relationship that came through so strongly, and they showed the trust in a way that wasn't contrived at all. There wasn't some big moment where it was like, I don't know if I can count on you. It's like, you know, I've got your back.
Or like, you really saved my ass in there. Like
none of that, but like just over time, as they see each other work, they see you know, one of them may do something and the other one might kind of question it, but the results speak for themselves. And if they're not, they don't need to call somebody on it. They don't.
And they pick up on each other's beats.
Just kind of looks at him.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
You get that sense of them as a unit in every scene. And the movie itself sets up their individual personalities really well, but not in any sort of heavy-handed way.
Right.
You immediately get who Woodward is. You immediately get who Bernstein is, which maybe leads us to talking about Dustin Hoffman.
Because sure, if we have to, but we should. Yeah.
Because who Bernstein is a little sneaky, a little persuasive in ways that maybe you shouldn't be totally comfortable with.
Right.
Not in horrible ways, but in very smarmy sort of ways.
Yeah.
And like the way that first woman he talks to, that scene is just really pretty uncomfortable. Having heard what Dustin Hoffman's been accused of.
Right.
Why are you looking at me like that?
You're attractive. You are very attractive.
You know, my girlfriend told me to watch out for you.
Who?
I'm not giving any names.
Steuben said you work for Colson.
The way he is just trying to sidle in with this girl and
like, hey, baby.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's not something we have to talk about because it doesn't lean so heavily on it, but it definitely is part of Bernstein's character.
It is,
and
because
Dustin
it's also how
Hoffman
he,
plays it really
you
well.
notice how he even physically can just weasel his way into a door.
Right.
You know, like it's almost impressive. Like I couldn't do that. Someone's got a door halfway open and I just sort of keep talking and encroaching my way in. He's pushy. He's a pushy guy in this movie. And you know, in terms of journalism,
the success of a journalist could be not taking no for an answer, you know?
Yeah.
But it just feels weird to watch Dustin Hoffman do that. And we should maybe say, and maybe should have said earlier, we picked this movie and Dustin Hoffman as sort of not our focus for this, because the point of this isn't totally to explore what's happening with all the
Me Too and Time's Up. Yeah.
But we did pick this movie before John Oliver went at Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
So this isn't, we are, I mean, whatever, it is what it is. We weren't being opportunistic. We picked and recorded the episode where
we had known that he had been alleged to have done some
Our primary
questionable
focus was
behavior.
all the President's Men, but then thought like, well, I hadn't seen anything with Kevin Spacey.
Yeah,
or,
we had to ask ourselves this about
like,
all the movies that we've grown up with that now have these men in them.
Yeah, and then seeing these men in these movies, and All the President's Men is maybe a very like kind of light example of it, but you know, it does, you see sort of the implication of the sexual politics. This movie, which wasn't even about that, has these sorts of like the way men can treat women and the way as just as a given. And
I don't know how true that is of Bernstein at all. Like at the actual Carl Bernstein.
No idea.
You know, I don't know if that's something that is embellished in the Hoffman performance of Bernstein, or if that's something that they were like, yeah, that's kind of who he is too.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, we talked a little bit at the beginning about movies we watched since the last time we recorded, and one of the movies I saw was the Meyerowitz Stories, which is Noah Baumbach, and Dustin Hoffman is in that. And that was a very strange movie to watch in light of all this stuff, because even though Dustin Hoffman's character in that movie isn't involved in anything unseemly, there is a scene where somebody talks about how an old family friend, when she was young, exposed himself to her, and she saw him masturbating, like he was masturbating in front of her, and I was just like, holy cow, that's like, when did they make Meyerowitz Stories? I mean, it was certainly before the stuff.
Oh yeah,
and it was even released before.
It was released in the summer, I think, right?
But then the two characters who are in the scene when she tells them that this had happened, they have the sort of debate. They're both like furious that this happened. And one of them calls it assault, and the other one says, well, it's not really assault. She wasn't assaulted. And so they start having this conversation about whether or not, it was creepy and it wasn't right. And it clearly damaged her, but it wasn't assault. And she says it wasn't assault. And I guess I was kind of surprised I hadn't heard anything in connection with Dustin Hoffman and the Meyerowitz stories regarding that scene in the movie, but maybe I just wasn't digging deeply enough.
To be honest, though, I mean, aside from the John Oliver confrontation, Hoffman's been one of the stories that hasn't gotten as much attention as a lot of the other ones
because
have.
It enters that conversation of what's assault, what's creepy.
Yeah, exactly. It's
clearly inappropriate, but how far do we punish somebody? There's so many like questions and potentials and like what ifs, and it's like
and also the one that was brought up was from like the early 80s. Not to say that because it's older it's excusable, but you don't know if maybe he's changed since then. Like you don't.
Right. And I mean, even Hoffman's kind of not explanation, but it was, you don't know what it was like to work on a movie back then. Or like, And it's true. Like we aren't supposed to watch that scene where Bernstein is being creepy. We aren't supposed to watch it and think anything bad about Bernstein.
No, you're not supposed to.
We're supposed to sort of say like, that guy.
Yeah.
You know? And so that was the mindset of the time. And so...
Yeah, that scene is not in there to have you call into question Carl Bernstein's character.
No.
At all.
No.
If anything,
it's to admire his pluck.
Yeah.
To get somebody to talk to him.
Yeah.
You know? And so there's just, I don't know.
Well,
let us both be clear that there is no excuse for the behavior. Like, like whatever context you could give it, it's inappropriate, it's damaging, it's wrong, it should never have been allowed, and it should be talked about. Mm-hmm. It should be brought up.
So, okay, what else can we really say as men? I can tell you my personal experience watching Dustin Hoffman in this movie with knowing what's happened, and I can say that scene rubbed me the wrong way. Mm-hmm. There were certain things that I was like, oh, that doesn't play as cute as it did back then, I'm sure, anymore. But it didn't stop me from being able to be absorbed in the character of Carl Bernstein, like personally. Mm-hmm. But what that does make me pause for is I'm giving this a 5-star rating. I'm saying this is a great movie.
Yeah.
If a woman were to come to me and say, I'm sorry, I just can't watch that because it's got Dustin Hoffman in it, I feel like I'm at the point where I can say, that's fine. I'm not going to push you into doing that. No. I'm not going to say you should really look over that fact.
You
should
owe Dustin Hoffman anything.
Right, exactly. And that might be the most I can say, is that those scenes kind of bugged me. I'm just being honest. Other than that, I was still able to really get engrossed in not only the story, but the character of Carl Bernstein and Dustin Hoffman's performance as that character.
Yeah.
You know, I was able to see,
because it's not
it being
central to his character.
No, not at all.
It's a
or the movie
believable facet or tactic that he would use as a journalist, and maybe because we see so little of their private life, to say that that's how he would treat women generally is too big of a leap in interpretation. But yeah, I think it's okay for us to feel that way about it. Right? Like,
it may or may not be okay. I'm just being honest. This is the way I feel. Yeah. I don't know.
That's true.
And I am trying my hardest. It's hard to be a man and actually be real about saying I need to just listen. You know, like I've had to at work. I work with mostly women as a librarian, and I've had to like just shut up. You know, and it's hard being on a podcast where we're just supposed to talk, you know, and now we're talking about this topic, and I almost feel like, but the only appropriate thing for us to do is just to kind of shut up, you know? And so I don't know what else to say, because we don't have a woman's perspective here. We probably should have brought one in, but you know, we don't have that. And the most I can say is this is how I felt watching the movie. And I'm open to whatever a woman would feel seeing someone who's been accused of these things in any performance, you know, minor or major, whether it has to do with the actual character they're playing or not. For some reason, I kind of knew I probably wouldn't have a problem with this movie, but I've got my own lines I draw. Like I'm really scared to watch Louis again. Yeah. Like I don't know because I'm a little less sure of whether I would be able to judge it the same way anymore or see past what we know. Same goes for, I haven't watched a Kevin Spacey movie since since the news has come out, and I'm not that eager to either. I don't know where or why I'm drawing the lines where I am.
Well,
but All the President's Men with Hoffman in it didn't seem like it was. I wasn't scared to watch it. Put it that way.
Well, certainly the allegations against Hoffman are not the ones that are out there for Kevin Spacey, or for Harvey Weinstein. But like, I showed a clip of Pulp Fiction in my class this week. Like, that movie got made because of Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, and that's hard to gauge too, because it's like, when you're watching a movie, have I ever given much thought to the producer? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, other than maybe during the Oscar season where I'm paying attention to who's like really campaigning for what movies. Otherwise, I don't go see a movie because it's produced by anyone. I go see it because it's starring or directed by someone. Whether it's hard to define or not, I think it's just being honest to say that we all have some type of scale that we put these things on. And I don't know if that's right or not either. But I think that's just what we all do.
Well, what's definitely not right is trying to force a scale on somebody.
Oh, no. Yeah.
I think all men need to just learn to shut up and to realize again how little we know and understand, and do our best to understand and not to project our feelings on somebody else's experience. And if something makes somebody uncomfortable, if somebody has something to say in regards to these men and the way that they make them feel, it is not our job to correct or contextualize or inform on anything.
Yeah, well, I think maybe at this time we should heed your advice and just acknowledge that there is so much that we don't understand, and just leave it to maybe something that maybe some of our listeners can chime in a little bit more on if they would like to. But I would like to maybe at this point steer the conversation back to All the President's Men. I just had one last question I wanted to throw out to discuss before we wrap this up. And it goes back to this idea of the power of the press, and specifically the work that Woodward and Bernstein did to uncover the Watergate scandal. And I'm wondering, do we even live in a time where the press could have that kind of power anymore?
Yeah.
There was no Fox News. You didn't have this whole branch of the media that was only meant to be an antagonist to what we would call the mainstream media, but what was really the only media at the time. I think what is cautionary about this movie is that journalists can do all the work, but ultimately it's up to the citizens to listen. I don't know if we're there anymore. I don't, and that's really weighed on me since watching this movie. It's like, it's so easy to watch that movie and be like, yeah, power of the press, First Amendment.
There's hope.
There's hope. Like, as long as there's journalists that are out there to tear the powerful down who are exploiting that power, this country has got something good going with it, and the way that this administration and their entire branch of media has been able to dilute journalism to the point where a healthy chunk of this country does not trust it. Because, there's one thing in All the President's Men for them to say, well, the people don't care about this. It's another thing for them to say, well, they just don't believe you.
Right.
You don't actually have that in All the President's Men. You don't have the readers saying, well, yeah, I read that, but I don't actually believe their reporting.
Right.
And we have that now.
Instead of saying it's more like, if they were to name their sources, we're like, oh, you mean the guy that took money from Harvey Weinstein? Oh, you mean the person who knew that Hillary Clinton was going to blah, whatever? Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm right. I'm right there with you that I don't know if it would make a difference. It's all faith-based now. Right. People feel like, well, no, I don't believe that. And also, it's just gotten to the point that party over country is not centralized to a few people in power. It's It's just the citizens are party over country now.
The voters, yeah.
And yeah, I don't care what he did. I voted for him, and I'll vote for him again. It's it doesn't feel the movie feels relevant, but a little idealistic.
I guess what I find disheartening about watching All the President's Men now is All the President's Men seems to stop their sentence with the truth is out there, and once the truth is unveiled, justice is served.
Yeah.
And that's where the naivete comes in,
Yeah.
because now it's like, I feel like it would say, the truth is out there, so what?
Yep. You know, even if convictions come down from Mueller or from anything, there's still going to be that
people calling it a witch
widespread
hunt.
doubt.
Yeah. I would be curious. I wasn't alive then. You weren't alive then either. I don't know if there was like a good faction or group of Americans who, even as Watergate was coming out and even as, Nixon resigned, if they were kind of like, he really shouldn't have resigned. What he did really wasn't all that bad. Or like, like the country would have been better off if they would have just left that story alone, or,
I wonder. Yeah. I don't know, man. It's tough to see a positive way out of this.
I don't know. It was weird because that was in my mind as I was watching it, but I still felt hope watching it. Like I still felt like even if that's what happens, there are journalists out there who are uncovering these things, and so I'm happy. I'm glad that there is still print journalism and investigative journalism. And I have to have hope that there's at least a majority of people who are just reasonable.
You gotta have hope.
You have to. What else do you have if you don't? So,
well, I think no matter what, regardless of when you watch this movie, we both think it's a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really great movie to rewatch, just to appreciate everything about it. Because really, I don't feel like, aside from things that are colored by contemporary issues, I don't feel like there was anything really negative that I could say about the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Library of Congress, the stuff, but
that I could say, nothing negative that I would say. They didn't have anything where like teachers are screwing up.
Yeah. Well, okay, so it sounds like we're
best buds.
You were at a 4, willing to bump it up to a 5. Are you gonna do that? You think? Is this a 5-star movie for you, or is it just still a really good movie?
That's tough to say. I'll bump it up to 5.
Yeah?
Yeah. Are you?
I don't. I mean, I was already at a 5.
I know you were, but you were also talking about dropping it for.
But I explained why I couldn't.
Slander.
Yeah, it's not slander if it happened.
That's
true.
That's true.
And that's what happened. So I would have slammed it if that turned out to be a Hollywood fabrication. I'd be very angry about that.
Well, it wasn't. It was a misstep by a librarian or a clerk.
Yes.
You were quick to point out it was not a librarian. It ended up being somebody who hadn't been given the credentials.
Right.
So,
Best Buds,
definitely, and definitely encourage you guys to watch this movie and watch it again if you haven't seen it in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, let's talk about what we're going to do next time.
Yeah, so next month is going to be February,
which is the month of Valentine's Day.
Love is in the air, along with the bitter cold, probably. But maybe.
Who knows?
You don't know these days.
Could be 50s, could be single digits.
Love is in the...
It's still in the air, but it may not be cold.
Right.
So with love being in the air, we kind of realized we haven't done a more traditional romantic comedy.
Straight up romantic comedy.
Before, which I guess to call traditional, there could be like, somebody would be like, thinking of Bringing Up Baby or some of the more screwball comedy, romantic comedies. We're not talking about that. We're talking more like 80s influenced, or in this case, actually 80s romantic comedy. Right. We're going to watch a movie that neither of us have seen, but we both wanted to for a bit now.
Yeah, we've all got our lists, and I've got my list, and it's always been on there.
Yeah.
And it just stares me in the face, and I'm like, I'll get to it someday.
Yeah, but I never feel like it.
Yeah, to be honest, yeah.
So
even though I think I might enjoy it.
Yeah, I have no idea if I'll enjoy it.
Yeah,
and we realized the episode will probably come out after Valentine's Day,
right?
But the spirit of Valentine's Day,
yeah, 'tis the season.
'Tis the season to watch Moonstruck. We're going to watch Moonstruck with Cher
That's what always stares me in the face when I'm looking at my to-do list.
And the moon, yeah.
The moon and Cher in front of it.
In front of the moon.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cher, Nicolas Cage, correct?
Yep.
Directed by Norman Jewison.
Yeah.
Who I know I've seen Norman Jewison movies. I've seen
In the Heat of the Night is a Norman.
Roof.
Oh, I've never seen Fiddler on the Roof actually. I need to.
It's good.
Yeah, it's another one. Maybe it's a Norman Jewison thing. Like all his movies are movies I want to see, but haven't.
So In the Heat of the Night, have you seen that?
I have seen that one, so it's not.
I have
it's
not.
No, well, maybe it's a thing with us. Like
where combined, we have not seen any.
Is
Norman
there any
Jewison
single
movies.
Norman Jewison movie we both seen? I honestly, if you had said Norman Jewison did Moonstruck, that would have been news to me.
It is news to me.
Yeah,
I said it.
Wow, but it's not fake news though. So
No.
It's well documented.
Yeah. Yep.
No, I don't think there is a single Norman Jewison movie that we've both seen, and I think that's a real shame.
That is a real shame.
And we're gonna fix that
because he's an accomplished director. He's a respected director.
Yeah, although he hasn't done a movie since 2003.
Is he alive?
I should find
Sounds like
that
a
out.
terrible question. But I don't
Yeah, he's
know.
alive.
No, good for him.
Yeah. He's getting up there, though. He's born in 1926 in Toronto.
Oh, a Canuck.
Yeah, so that's another reason to maybe watch this movie. How many Canadian directors have you watched?
Oh, gosh.
Is it too many to count?
Just so many. Just all the greats.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to even name one.
Just to pick one out of
right.
the sea.
Well, to pick one is to name one, and I can't do that right now. I just don't want to. There's just so many.
I mean, yeah, there's just the greats, all the greats,
all the Canadian directors that we know and love.
The Canadian directors, the French Canadian directors,
the Toronto. I mean, the Toronto Film Festival,
Scotch thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I didn't even need to say it. The
Toronto, the Mecca.
Right.
Really?
Well, sure. I mean, one of the film meccas of Canada. Hollywood. I mean, the Canadian Hollywood.
Yeah.
Is
you hear that bantered about all the time. Yeah.
And you just forget. You forget the phrase just because you hear it everywhere.
Yeah. The movements, the people, the festivals. It's just
you've got the films coming out of there. You've got the movies coming out of there. You've got the
industry,
the actors, the directors. I mean,
the eras, the decades,
the short films, the feature length,
animated
documentaries. I bet it's just overwhelming.
Yeah,
I mean, you just look at the number of Norman Jewison movies we've seen, and it's
not together, but the ones we've seen individually.
Right? Oh yeah, combined. When you combine,
I can't even count
knowledge.
them. I can't count them.
I couldn't either. It's just. It's really surprising we have not seen Moonstruck.
No, considering how much
gets lost in the sea of Canadian directors.
Well, it does because there's so many.
That's what I'm saying.
The depth of Canadian film, and I think that this is really going to be us just filling in a gap that should have been filled in a long time ago because of how much we personally love Canadian film.
It essentially has been filled in because of how much Canadian film we've consumed. It's by osmosis. I feel like we've seen Moonstruck.
It's a
hallmark of Canadian film.
Cinema. Yeah, cinema.
Oh, I haven't even talked about Canadian cinema yet.
Right. No, you were just talking about the
film
movies.
and then movies. Yeah. But Canadian cinema.
CC, as they call it.
Right. You didn't even need to say that.
No, I know. Well, I mean, because sometimes people think it's talking about closed captioning, but it's not. It's Canadian cinema.
I've literally never thought about anything other than Canadian cinema when I hear the letters CC.
Okay, good. Not about copying someone on an email. You, in fact, thought when you were putting a name in there that you were sending whatever email you were sending off to the Canadian
I thought it was
cinema.
you just put the names of people who are fans of Canadian cinema.
I'm sure this is going to come up in the next episode, but we're going to talk about how many movies are involved with Canadian cinema, and you're going to be surprised. I think.
I bet you will be, yeah. And just Norman Jewison as one of the standouts of CC directors.
Yeah, and Moonstruck in particular.
Right.
So it's not just that it's romantic
Valentine's
comedy
Day.
in the month of February.
Right. It's just finally we're giving CC its due.
Its due. Yeah. And I'm excited about it. So it's going to be the 80s romantic comedy. We're thinking.
We're hoping. Yeah, we have no idea.
And if the IMDb subject headings comedy, drama, romance are accurate. But I mean, and that is strictly comedy, drama, romance. That is Canadian cinema in a nutshell. I don't even think Moonstruck is a Canadian film. I think just Norman Jewison was born in Toronto.
Yeah,
like that's it. Like,
but that's just the essence of Canadian cinema,
right?
Too.
It's not all movies that came out of Canada. It's people who were born in Canada who then came to Hollywood.
Just really it's that
kind of like spaghetti westerns. The Italian directors
school.
Coming to exactly the Canadian school. Yeah,
I mean. Yeah. So watch Moonstruck.
Yes. And,
whether or not you've seen it before, we'd love for you to watch it with us. Tell us what you think about it. Always tell us what you think about the movie we just talked about.
All the President's Men, in case you forgot.
Yeah,
it's a new year. So any suggestions people have for movies that they want to hear us discuss would be great to hear as well. We've got a whole new year's worth of movie anniversaries, a whole new year's worth of months. And stuff that happens in those months. And,
we only have 10 now.
Right.
Really.
So we already chose January and February, but
10
months worth of events and holidays and annual occurrences.
Yeah.
So let us know. There's a lot of ways you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple, but one of them is Facebook. And we're still getting those listeners from the Philippines.
Yeah.
So welcome again,
great.
Filipino listeners. And but you can always find us. Just search "Can We Still Be Friends" podcast and like us. If you like us on there, then you'll catch some of our updates. Although the algorithm tends to drown us out.
With that algorithm.
Yeah. There is Twitter. Our handle is CWSBF. C not standing for Canadian.
No.
Cinema. That's
you would assume, but no.
You would, but it's this can we still be friends?
Yeah. Which is actually, like, sharp listeners will know, that's actually a nod to Canada. Canada, we still be
Yes,
friends.
You're right. Yeah, and it's also a triple meaning. There's the Cannes Film Festival as well, and
right.
So we leave out the extra letters there, but that is a nod to that as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of secrets.
I didn't want to. I mean, this will be our 60th episode of Moonstruck. I wanted to see if people could find all the layers. So far, people haven't. But really dig into those words. Can we still be friends? We've told you to. The first, we got you started with can.
Yeah.
Canada, we still be friends, and also can we still be friends? Can, of course, French, which is always a nod back to French Canada,
Montreal. Yeah,
right.
Mm-hmm.
But there's more. There are definitely
so many.
There
more.
are things in there, and there's even stuff about that first word. I don't want to say.
Don't give too much away.
But
don't give. It's just I think now people know to look.
Right.
I think for a long time we were like, why isn't anybody noticing the layers and the depth to the name of our podcast?
Yeah.
And I feel like now you've been given a tip as a
the
listener.
lid's off, and it's
there. And
I want to say.
I know.
want to say it.
I'll just say. Okay.
I won't say it.
I will. How about?
I won't say it.
I'll just say question mark.
I didn't even think you were going to give him that much.
I
wasn't going to give him that much.
I know, but I'm being nice.
Gosh. All right, now I'm excited to hear what you guys. I mean, it's right there. Nate's practically.
I practically spoiled it
out.
Yeah,
it's. But
I just got so excited. I want people to.
I just didn't think you were going to go with like the one that's so controversial. But it's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. There's more. There's definitely more. And if you find something out, you can always email us.
Yep. Feedback at canwestillbefriends.net. That's the email address.
Right.
And that one's just an email. There's not a lot of
regular email in
there.
But
then we also have the ability for you to call us and leave a voice message. The number is 847-306-9532.
Mm-hmm. And as always, a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts it goes a long way. And nothing better than just telling other people about it. And, finding friends that you think might like what we do and passing it along.
I feel like there were a couple people I saw on Facebook who were saying that this year they wanted to get into podcasts.
Hey.
And they were putting up stuff on their feeds of like, hey, what podcast should I listen to?
Yeah.
So, hey, if you haven't already done that, a little shout out would be nice. It'd be nice to, have other people join the party.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and we will catch you next time when we discuss Moonstruck.